All right. I know we are keeping everybody from drinks upstairs, so I think we're going to do a quick session and answer some questions. My name's Bill Hobbs. I'm the CEO of the Epiphany Collective. We specialize in cultural strategy around data. And we're going to talk a little bit about one of our clients, Volta, who's going to give you a quick understanding of what they do in the music industry. And then we'll talk about some of the data insights that we found. Now, what I think is interesting about what they were chatting about in the previous panel is we totally agree. You know, getting to the right data that actually shows audience context and shows motivations is critical. And so a lot of what we do as an agency is we're working with brands to really help identify those motivations, those communities, and really understand the interaction of those audiences so that brands can make good, solid strategic decisions. So we'll start out with Alex, who's the CEO of Volta. He's going to take you through what the product is. And then Stephanie, who runs our delivery, she's our Chief Data Officer, will tell you a little bit about the insights and how we map this kind of data. Thank you.
Hey everyone, my name is Alex. I'm the CEO of Volta, and we make mixed reality creation tools. You can kind of think of it as Legos for mixed reality is kind of what we affectionately call it. Essentially what it is it's a really easy way for musicians, creators, performers, artists to create incredible mixed reality 3D spatial environments that they can then perform in that are audio reactive. Essentially, it takes, you know, the expensive $500,000, million, $2 million, $3 million productions and of you know, the different mixed reality immersive productions that we've seen increasingly over the past couple of years and makes it literally free to anyone to use. And our aim is to democratize mixed reality creation. We are predominantly working with musicians, and that's why we came to the Epiphany Collective. But really what our aim is to make mixed reality creation accessible to everyone, because we believe that it will become an art form in its own right, on par with theater and art and gaming and music and cinema. But it's just not going to happen, especially not in any meaningful way, until more and more people have access to those tools. But everybody needs to have access to them in a way that they can shape and customize and personalize to themselves. What we like to, you know, say internally is that, you know, everybody wants to be Daft Punk, but nobody realizes that they can be, you know, at least not until now, until you have tools like ours that are accessible to you. And so, but, you know, the artists that really inspire us are artists, you know, just like Daft Punk, that, you know, they're not genre specific. They are, the thing that threads them all together is that they want to build their own universe with music at its core, but build something that's custom to them. You know, the David Bowies of the world, you know, did this first. Daft Punk, Nine Inch Nails, Gorillaz, Bjork. Those are the type of artists that inspire us, and that's who we really think will be seen as the icons for this new art form, which is mixed reality, which is experience itself as a canvas. And our aim is to make Volta the de facto paintbrush for that canvas.
I think the only thing to add to that on my side is just so far as, you know, all the big major artists having that sort of budget are able to put on these crazy performances to really be compelling and put out content that puts them ahead of the crowd. And the day and the age that we're in now, in terms of digital first, in terms of everyone looking to optimize reach and really kind of outperform on, you know, all the social media channels, this really is a canvas for the up and comers, the bedroom DJs, the producers, those that don't have the same budget and the same voice to really stand out and start competing.
Absolutely. And I think, you know, as you think through this technology, we were part of their showcase last night, which was amazing. They had a DJ using this live, and you could see kind of all of the experience. It was awesome. But I think one thing that really struck me as we were working with Volta was the idea that so many brands out there are really focused now on micro-influencers and folks that really want to create interesting, different things, but have highly targeted audiences. So I think this product absolutely allows you to understand that in a different way and understand how it's possible to create without these massive budgets, as we discussed. So I think we can click. So we worked on this project with BAM as well as Volta, and I'll just give you a quick overview of kind of what we worked on. Very quick overview. So you know, ultimately, this is a very technical product, right? So you're having to kind of market something to audiences that either are highly technical or, you know, have the passion and want to learn to use a product. And so their current audience was very focused on music industry insiders. They had a lot of investors, Marshmallow, Post Malone's company, you know, a bunch of folks that have come in to invest in them. But the question is, what are they missing, right? What are the areas that they didn't necessarily know were great opportunities for them? So that was really how we set out to look at how do we personalize this for the audiences that would matter, and how do we do it at scale? And so our technology is called Epiphany IQ. Stephanie's going to talk a little bit about how we did this, but ultimately what we're doing is we're combining a variety of data sets, and we're able to really understand the context. So as we worked through this process, we really wanted to understand everything about Volta and their audience and how to drive things forward, so we could create this better approach to user acquisition. Sure. Yeah. So the original hypothesis was this idea that we would create a seed list of manufacturers and musicians. And out of that seed list, just to explain a little bit about what we're doing. So this technology, as I mentioned, is very much focused on audience relationships and communities. So the idea was, let's find the current communities they're in, and then let's let the AI capability of the tooling discover those communities where they're not. So that's what we did. So we put together an iterative seed list and got things going. I think what we talk about a lot is, you know, an unsorted list of followers, or just, you know, someone who is has a ton of followers, but it's not really relevant to what's happening in this audience. Those are not the people that we want to focus on. We really want to focus on the core audience that's going to really be interested in this. So Stephanie could tell you a little bit about the project and show you a little bit on the mapping.
Sounds good. So in terms of the seed list, what it does is, once we get the seed list, set, which we actually had to figure out, like, we have to have the hypothesis of who is that target audience. So as Bill said, we thought, okay, well, it could be music, like industry people who, you know, actually use a hardware or software solutions. Also, obviously, musicians themselves. And then what we're doing is basically we're collecting, rather than what people have done online, we're collecting the people that they're following, right? So if you think about how you behave on social media, you're essentially really following topics that you either are passionate about, you know, whether you absolutely love it or absolutely hate it, you'll actually follow both sides. But, you know, on an aggregate basis, you're essentially clustering people based on their interests. And so the mapping itself, what it does is it'll actually continue to sort of find the following relationships until it gets to a map that is usable. And in Volta's case, it looks like this. So this is entirely, AI machine learning driven, and what it does is, you know, it took just a few accounts on Twitter for it to actually create this particular map. That's I don't actually remember the exact number of map nodes, but each of the colors represent a different group, and just to let you know, even though there are, I think, 7 groups here. realistically, there's actually a lot of subgroups within these clusters as well. And so, it doesn't just stop there. The more center it is, means that they're closer to the original seed, the original hypothesis of people that could be that target audience. The larger the nodes indicates the percent or the likelihood or the number of followers, of those nodes from the map itself. So you can see the size and influence. And obviously, there's a spatial relationship as well, right? So, different clusters you'll see communities will actually form and cluster together. And whether or not, it's dense or very sort of loosely formed indicates how close they are with each other within that cluster. So, based on this map, we found that there are 3 major groups. So there are the manufacturers, there are, the visual artists, which was great because that's also absolutely an area that we think Volta should be in, and also musicians. And so within music, there's, hip hop, dubstep, EDM, and then just random music. And I think that really goes to say, what Alex was saying earlier is the digital first, and really there is this democratization of content. And so there's so much sort of mainstream collaborations, cross genres, and that's how actually Gen Z, when we actually map Gen Z music, that's exactly how everybody is consuming music or consuming a lot of information, right? Is that there is not one specific type of music that they'll necessarily listen to, because you go on Spotify and there are all these different playlists. And so, there's definitely a discovery process in that. So, what do we do with that? Sorry, I have a 3-year-old, so, Elmo is really popular. Well, what we found was, Volta has obviously done a fabulous job in terms of its marketing strategy. It has built partnerships with, it's been covered by industry magazines, and, Imogen Heap has also done, one of the biggest influencers has also done, her own take of, what Volta could do for her music. And all of that, though, when we map those particular partnerships and influencers out within this map, what we found was that they weren't necessarily the ones that were most influential. Sure, the nodes are large because there are a lot of people who actually follow, but they're not necessarily at the center of it all. They're not necessarily, and I think actually the artist that did that is you can barely see her. She's on that, upper left-hand corner. And
I think you guys were talking a little bit about how your team felt about the using data, versus their own kind of gut instinct.
Yeah, one of our lead developers, when we told him that we were gonna do this exercise with you guys, they were pretty skeptical, because they're just like, all right, what are you gonna tell me about my own industry that I don't already know? And then they deliver this incredibly detailed and thoughtful report based off of all of this data, and they were just like, all right, they put their hands up, okay, this is actually unbelievably insightful, it all makes sense. And there were a handful of surprises in there for us in terms of really how we should be approaching getting a beachhead market, in which is what we're doing now. We literally just kind of started a meaningful jump into going to market.
Yeah, and you guys haven't been doing this that long, right? How long have you been actually in production out in the world?
So this actually started as my thesis project in a master's program. So for a year and a half, it just kind of evolved, and it was really just me, so I don't really kind of count that. But I'd say about 2 years is really how long we've really been a company. And I was fortunate to find a COO, a CTO, and a chief product officer who really came with a lot of both experience and a really good network, especially our CTO, of interactive mixed reality, audio reactive Unity developers, which by itself is pretty niche, and he has himself 12 years of experience with it. And so, execution is actually not for most kind of companies our size, execution is kind of the difficult part. That's not really, the difficult part for us. We're able to make some pretty innovative, sophisticated tech. What the problem has been is more on the communication and the branding and getting people to understand what the value propositions are for them, especially when it can vary drastically from one of those, nodes to another.
Yeah, and I think for a lot of Web3 ready technologies, which I know you guys have stopped using that term because it's so annoying, but for a lot of these new technologies, there's massive impact that's available. There's a highly targeted capability. There's, own your own real estate, really kind of drive things forward in a very different way. So I think one of the thoughts here in going through this was to really show, regardless of size of the company, regardless of the newness of the company, you can make this data make sense for the corporate world, and you can actually, get outcomes, that you're really trying to drive towards. So I think a lot of that hopefully is evident here.
I think as well, messaging-wise, you touched on it in terms of Web3, and we've only actually been in the market since September from that kind of timeline that Alex mentioned. So we actually launched publicly in September, and using the lingo, we are essentially building 3D worlds. It's the metaverse. We've actually completely dropped that language, for example, from this exercise because it's meaningless to consumers. It doesn't really actually mean anything. The value proposition isn't conveyed to an investor audience. Sure, it makes a lot of sense into the corporate space, but words like mixed reality and metaverse and whatnot to the usual customer doesn't really translate to anything. So it's also been an exercise of slimming down the language, bringing it to its tangible parts.
Yeah, I think trying to help the people move beyond just the early adopters is the criticality, for any brand. And they really want to understand, how do I help people understand what we do in a very simple, basic way? I mean, that's selling marketing 101, right? We need to make it understandable and consumable.
Which I have to say, for anything that's, it'd be one thing if we were iterating on some sort of product or making something better, but not only is what we're making relatively new, but the market itself is relatively new. And so being able to, like Mitch said, communicate that in a way that isn't generic or redundant, like, the words immersive, mixed reality, metaverse, reality, all of these words just mean, they mean everything and nothing. And so figuring out like what the, and for something that's as visual as ours is, if we're in a scenario where all we have is, semantics, dialing that in is unbelievably important.
I think we stepped all over Stephanie's presentation, but I wanted to make sure we're interactive since we have a small audience.
Well, I mean, I'm told that I need to pick up the pace, and I'm sorry, when I get to data, I really try. I try. So what we did was we had this actually long master plan of how they're going to conquer the world, but to spare you all the details, this is the starting point. What we decided was that far left corner is the dubstep group. And that's where we should start. And why? Well, there is, so these guys are actually, they're only about 4% of the map. They're twice as likely to follow each other, which means that you're going to get that network effect immediately. They're also more, and it's actually quite intriguing as well, because this is a really small group, but also they seem to be really sort of ahead. They're really early adopters among, their industry peers. So that's the other thing that was really positive. Now, within this group, there's also 3 major subgroups, which is US, London, and international dubstep producers or musicians. And so, what we looked at was, okay, well, where should we start? And it came out, we should actually start with the London group. And the reason is they are, like I said, it's actually 2.3 times more likely to follow each other, but the UK scene is 11 times more, which means that if you can reach just 1 or 2 of these guys and they're, they actually like it, then you could potentially really reach the entire group very, very quickly.
And I think that's the arbitrage example that, we talk a lot about, right? Finding the right communities and influencers that can really help drive your message forward, but do it in a way that's not, exorbitantly expensive. I mean, I compare it to the idea of CPMs, years ago. If you had a highly targeted audience, you had a better CPM. Really simple. And so I think we're in a different place now, where the audiences and those relationships are really what is helping inform, those decisions. But very similarly, you want to find the folks that can move the needle.
Cool. So this is just a quick comparison from a data perspective in terms of, just showing why this UK dubstep group actually makes sense. So when you look at, the stats, obviously, from the first influencer, major influencer work, she's obviously super, super influential. However, within the actual people who would be using the software, she's not nearly, right? So she's basically, I think, 8.9, in terms from a 0 to 10 scale, influential for music equipment and, those types of groups. But if you look at, Mala, who is one of the dubstep DJs from London, what you'll see is that he is far more influential, just from the spider graph. So that was one thing that, as we're actually picking individuals from that, from the data, then we can actually start thinking about how to target better.
But if you just look at that difference in followers, right? I mean, you can see this is a highly targeted, this is a great find. And I think you guys actually used this for your decision making last night, right, at the showcase?
We absolutely did. Yeah, we had an investor showcase with a number of artists. I must say, begrudgingly, dubstep or drum and bass is not the company's choice of music. But
Dubstep might be anathema to the techno heads out there, and many in the company are. Yeah.
Yeah, so we followed the research. We chose a drum and bass artist, a very prominent one who's also an artist. All the warm-up acts were in the same sort of vein and was live streamed. And what we saw from it was a huge sort of trickle through in terms of acquisition of those highly targeted artists, rather.
As well, the showcase was last night, so we're kind of trying to compile all of the information today. But the engagement. So one thing that we've done, and this is kind of the newest thing that we've done, and the thing that we're showcasing last night was giving audiences the ability over live streams to actually have an impact on the content that they're watching. So you could literally type words into the chat window in YouTube, and that will have an effect on the actual content of the world. So like keywords like boom, there was this explosion in the virtual world. So forth. And so the amount of engagement from their audiences was huge. We're still, like I said, we're still kind of compiling it, but it's in the hundreds or potentially like 1,000 or 2,000 engagements on a 90-minute stream with an artist who he's not huge by any means, like however you want to quantify it, like 20,000, 30,000 Instagram followers, something like that. But that level of engagement, because we picked the right one, just really shines through.
And translating some of this work into kind of learnings for us, I guess the advantage of calling out being in the metaverse and Web3 is there's been a huge tailwind behind us. There's been no shortage of inbound interest. But, for a part of last year, it was almost feeling like we were chasing our tails. Do we work with rappers? Do we work in hip-hop? Do we work with electronic musicians? So to use this research and to really kind of compile it down to how do we actually take this to a stage strategy such that we conquer and find a beachhead market and use that to leverage into the next one. And the other kind of, very interesting piece behind this as well as a learning is because our tool is a content generation machine, it essentially means that each artist that uses Volta is promoting Volta in itself, sort of the TikTok kind of effect. So using, again, this sort of research just compounds that momentum behind acquisition and has really allowed us to sort of gather a lot of momentum.
And user-generated content, which is always awesome.
Absolutely.
This is all AI-driven. I don't know if we've said that already, but, the great aspect of that personalization is these guys, when the audience can interact and you can automatically respond using AI, I mean, that is kind of the nature of personalization. So pretty exciting stuff. I think we have one more slide, and then I think we can just open it up to questions. You want to speak about the last? I'm good.
Okay. So I think just a few quick takeaways. Number one is, Using some sort of, AI, ML-driven technique, obviously you can actually really figure out how to personalize and, how to really have more highly targeted approach, to getting, for your marketing strategy. Number two is really kind of a duh. If, the biggest follower counts don't necessarily translate into user acquisition, into whatever. If that were the case, I'm pretty sure everyone would just use Kim Kardashian for everything. The optimal paths sometimes actually come from very surprising, unknown audiences. And the third one is, rather than relying on estimates of what people might like, this approach actually looks at who they actually follow. So, a map is complex, but a connection is very simple. So once you understand how people are connected with each other, then you can, really create that personalized and, touch to your strategy.
It's genuinely influenced the go-to-market, right? What we've ended up with, we've spoken a lot around dubstep today, but essentially it's been broken down to sort of 20 clusters in terms of where do we go from dubstep, what happens next, and kind of each sequential sort of path. So it means that we're actually combining our business development activities in tandem with marketing. So the BD side of things looks at partnerships, festival opportunities, venue organizers in each of these clusters. Whilst on the marketing side, of course, that's what we're looking to through paid social and mass acquisition. So the two sort of layered prongs really is helping us move in that sequential manner. And dare I say it, hopefully conquer them.
For sure. We can open it up to a few questions. Just keep in mind, I know everybody's wanting to get to the party. So, but we'll stay as long as you like. So feel free to ask anything that's on your mind.
Well, fantastic presentation, the showcase. Thanks for the explanation. Love the connection between what, the intelligence of the machine and how that being applied to an actual business, problems.
Thank you.
Question, actually really quick one. How long did it take for you to actually map out that? That, and what are the amount of data point that you are looking at? I would imagine there's a minimum number of data point that would require to create something that meaningful.
That's a really, really good question. And the answer, is it depends. At a very, very simple, at its sort of simplest way, where we could just look at a few accounts, right? Like let's say actually 5 or 10 accounts online on any sort of platform will be able to generate something like that. Now, if you want to get super fancy, which of course, as data nerds, we would love to, what then you can do on top of that is to have geo restrictions, is to have, sort of the and or, right? So people who follow this but don't necessarily follow that. So a lot of customized, sort of approach to it if you really want to pinpoint. So it depends on the complexity of the question. It can actually get super, super technical.
I think this one took 3 weeks-ish. What I would say, though, is we have capabilities now with anonymized connectors where we can feed first-party data in, and we can actually look at the relationships across all the affinities and actually now know, what are people buying, how are they thinking about it, those types of things in a fully anonymized PII, GDPR compliant way. So, to Stephanie's point, it depends on the scope of the project, but I would say it's a lot lighter lift than most people think.
Yeah. So at the basic level, if you're actually just, looking at the tool to map the relationships, it's probably a matter of hours, a few days, but it can get super complex if you start layering data.
So my suggestion is we continue this conversation with cocktails on the roof.
I love that
Everything
suggestion.
you say will be that much more enlightening.
It'll be much better. All right. Well, we'll see everyone upstairs. Thank you.
Thank you.